Now it's time for the TaxCast special feature. Here's a question for you, and it's something criminals, kleptocrats and terrorists already know the answer to. Which country is the second easiest place in the world after Kenya to open an anonymous company to launder money? Yes, I'm afraid so. This month, the TaxCast looks at Tax Haven USA. It's really not rocket science if you want to hide millions or even billions of dollars. In many US states, all you need to do is pay a small fee, fill out a simple form, no ID checks needed, and your stolen money's safe from prying eyes faster than you can say, "God bless America." Here's Eryn Schornick of Global Witness.
No state collects beneficial ownership information, which is actually the information about the true owner of a company, one who actually exercises control over that company or derives economic benefit from that company. And there's service providers that offer you a company in one day, in 24 hours, and will do all the legwork for you. We've encountered examples where anonymous companies were used to enable drug trafficking, particularly from Mexico, with a company that was incorporated anonymously in Oklahoma. In other instances, we found anonymous companies enabled modern slavery, where companies were incorporated in Kansas, Missouri, and Ohio to trick victims from overseas, and they were able to derive $6 million from their human trafficking scheme. Anonymous companies also enable sanctions busting. An Iranian government used an anonymous New York company to conceal its ownership of a Fifth Avenue skyscraper, and it was in direct breach of sanctions. So those are some of the types of harm that we see, which demonstrate the ways in which anonymous companies are used.
The scale of the problem is huge when you think that nearly 2 million corporations are formed every year in good old Uncle Sam, and most of them don't need to provide even the names or addresses of the true owners.
Oh yeah, if I were a corrupt foreign official, I'd be looking to the United States. We excel at this.
Clark Gascoigne of the Financial Accountability and Corporate Transparency Coalition.
The United States is the second easiest place for criminal or terrorists to open an anonymous company to launder their money after Kenya. A bunch of academics did a study on this from Brigham Young University, UT Austin, and Griffith University in Australia a couple of years ago, and they drafted emails posing as either clearly corrupt, clearly criminal drug trafficking, or clearly terrorists that should have been raising red flags for whoever they were approaching with their story about how they needed to incorporate companies. And when they came to the United States, the U.S. incorporation services companies were actually the second easiest place for them to do this. They talk about this one guy in Florida where they set off red flags, and the guy says, clearly you're a freaking terrorist, and I'd be crazy to open an account for you, for anything less than $5,000. So he's going to do it. He's just going to charge $5,000 to do it, even though he thinks this is clearly for terrorism.
Clark, do you think that most US citizens understand the central role their country's playing in corruption?
No, they have no idea. I mean, they understand that there's corruption, but they don't have a clue, really, the scale of this problem and the ease with which these anonymous companies can be set up to flagrantly violate U.S. and foreign laws.
And if that academic study passed most ordinary US citizens by, now an expose on the popular investigative TV programme 60 Minutes has turned the spotlight onto the often overlooked players in this game, the corruption enablers. So we've talked about the incorporators of these anonymous companies, but further up the feeding chain are the lawyers. Global Witness went undercover, approached 13 New York law firms and filmed their meetings. They told these lawyers they were advising an African minister who wanted to spend millions on a Gulfstream jet plane, a plush townhouse and a yacht. They said he needed to get the money into the United States without detection. And obviously these are all things that should have screamed dirty money loud and clear. Yet all but one of these lawyers gave informal advice on how to move the cash. Here are some of those conversations captured on Global Witness's hidden camera, starting with the supposed African minister's representative.
If his name now would appear in connection with buying some real estate here and other items, it would look at least very, very embarrassing.
Right, because presumably his salary and wherever it is would not cover the kinds of acquisitions he's been
for sure, that's the salary of a teacher here. And so how can we make sure that he is being able to buy property here and to live a nice life, but his name being out?
Right.
So presumably we would set up a little bit of a series of owners to try and protect privacy as much as anything else.
Yeah.
So Company A is owned by Company B, which is owned jointly by Company C and D, and your party owns all of or the majority of the shares of C and D.
So we create several companies.
Yes.
And there may be other banking systems, usual banking havens, I think would be ones you would want to consider. We could provide you with the list of countries where the banking systems require less detail on ownership or source of funds.
You'd set up a Delaware corporation to own the real estate.
They don't send the lawyers to jail because we run the country.
Do you run the country?
Still do.
I love it.
Still do.
I should say some lawyers run the country.
So you are some of them? Two of them?
Yeah, a small amount.
We're still members of a privileged class in this country.
So what does it mean you run the country? It means you...
We make the laws.
We make the laws, and some people say we selectively enforce the laws.
Another way to look at it is the old adage, a good lawyer knows the law, and a great lawyer knows the judge. Okay. Now, in point of fact, I went to law school with half the judges who sit on the New York State Supreme and the Federal District Court in New York. This happens that way over time.
Right.
People you have lunch with, you're members of the Bar Association. Are they going to throw a case for you? No. But are they going to bend over backwards to be courteous to you? Yes, they are.
Now, Global Witness and 60 Minutes point out that the meetings with these lawyers were preliminary. None of the law firms took their pretend African minister on as a client, and no money was moved. Just one lawyer out of 13 didn't want to play ball. Clark Gascoigne.
In the United States, lawyers aren't subject to any sort of money laundering controls the way they are in Europe and other parts of the world. So it's a real problem, and corrupt foreign officials flock to it as their favorite destination.
It's ironic, really, Clark, isn't it, that on the one hand, the United States was named the jurisdiction of greatest concern by the Tax Justice Network recently in their latest Financial Secrecy Index, when the United States actually went up from 6th place to 3rd place as one of the world's most significant players offering financial secrecy services. Yet on the other hand, the United States has been so effective in tackling tax havens like Switzerland, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the United States is in a very uniquely American way of going about things in the world. When they saw that tax evasion was draining money out of the United States, that tax evaders could hide in Switzerland, Americans could hide in Switzerland and not pay their taxes, the United States was fed up and said, that's enough. With this one piece of legislation, we're going to put an end to that and require foreign banks to report, or they're going to get taxed exorbitantly. And so all the foreign banks came on board and they were going to share information with the United States. The problem is the United States wasn't great about reciprocating.
Right, they created a special law called FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. So the United States has defended its own interests and tax base against foreign tax havens and stopped a lot of US citizens from hiding their cash. But it's booming as a tax haven for foreigners. Here's Markus Meinzer of the Tax Justice Network's Financial Secrecy Index on the United States' resistance to the global standards moving towards greater transparency.
It's really of great hypocrisy how the United States have managed to lash out at the tax havens worldwide. And to be honest and to be fair, we owe the United States a lot in that respect. It has proven great leadership in that regard. In some way, it has managed to break open the Swiss banking secrecy, which would have probably not come about without the United States. But at the moment, it is not clear if and when and to what quality country-by-country reporting requirements will be implemented in the United States. This is combined with the fact that US have managed to hold out from this new automatic information exchange system. They have managed to wriggle through this push for greater transparency by arguing that, well, we have the FATCA law, our own law that provides a lot of information to the United States, but in exchange, what really comes out of the US is a trickle, is really not worth the speak. It's so small, it's so asymmetrical what is in the FATCA agreements, but still the US use that to hide behind FATCA and say, oh, we do reciprocity. And so this is the current political situation and climate in the US is so hostile to moving anywhere nearer full-fledged membership of the international community and is geared towards US first, US interests alone and above everyone else's.
According to the Tax Justice Network, the United States is a long way from being able to provide information required under genuine reciprocal information exchange because under its domestic law, its banks are still not required to collect the necessary beneficial ownership information. Clark Gascoigne again.
The United States took a couple steps forward a few years ago, but then just plateaued, hasn't moved forward, and the rest of the world is leaping ahead of the United States in tax transparency stuff. In Europe, we're seeing central registries of beneficial ownership becoming the standard. Many of the countries in Europe are going to fully public registries of beneficial ownership information. In Europe, also, the conversation is moving towards full public country-by-country reporting for multinational companies. In the United States, that's been taboo. And then, of course, there's the reciprocal automatic exchange of information. The U.S. sort of put their foot out first and said, we're gonna force people to give us information. And then that spurred this multilateral approach that we're seeing, that the OECD and almost 100 countries have signed up to. And the United States is continuing to go it alone.
But the Tax Justice Network's got a suggestion to bring the United States back on board. Markus Meinzer explains.
This is the high time now for European Union to start taking serious action to bring the US back to the negotiation table and to, for instance, introduce a 35% withholding penalty tax for anyone that is investing in the European markets, in the financial markets, but is not willing to fully reciprocate that data. This is only fair and proportional since the United States do exactly the same. They have in their FATCA law this kind of penalty withholding tax. If the European Union want the US really not to become the mega tax haven of the 21st century, then we should be very clear about this requirement. And this is the only language, I'm afraid, the United States at the moment is willing to understand political and economic power.
Straight after the Global Witness and 60 Minutes expose, legislation was proposed in the United States. It's not the first time, but each of these times it is gaining support from both of the main political parties. If this Incorporation Transparency and Law Enforcement Assistance Act is passed, it would end the use of anonymous companies. Of course, there's plenty of opposition to it. Clark Gascoigne.
The biggest opposition to this is the National Association of Secretaries of State. Each state in the United States has a Secretary of State, and they're in charge of doing a bunch of stuff, including running elections in the state and incorporating companies in the state. And when this bill was first introduced a number of years ago, the Secretaries of State of Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming got really nervous, and they ran to the National Association and asked them to set up a task force, which they then chaired, Nevada, Delaware, and Wyoming. And they came out with this white paper on how this bill would be terrible for states. And so every other state jumped on board and sort of blindly endorsed Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming's take on this. And the problem with that is that the bill is only going to discourage you from setting up a company if you're up to no good, right? And do we want that money? Do we want those companies to be set up in our country? Delaware receives about anywhere from a quarter to a third of its state budget from incorporation fees. So incorporation fees are a big source of revenue for Delaware, and that's why the Secretary of State's a little concerned about anything that's going to dent Delaware's ability to incorporate companies. It also speaks to why this should be a national law, why we should do this nationally, because if you do it nationally and all states have to do it at once, Delaware's not at a competitive disadvantage to any other state when it comes to incorporating companies. They're on the same level playing field with regards to transparency of ownership.
And another block to progress of this bill is that this is election year in the United States, in case you hadn't noticed, and it's not really a time when politicians are exactly focused on working together. But the toxicity of this issue is poisoning the elections too. The amount of political campaign donations going through anonymous shell companies is on the increase, and that's got worrying implications for democracy.
We're at a real significant risk of corruption in our political system if people can donate anonymously vast sums of money to presidential campaigns and get away with doing this anonymously. Disclosing that a shell company is donating is not actually disclosure. It just raises a lot of questions about the state of democracy in the United States. That's where we are. It's terrifying.
You've been listening to the Taxcast from the Tax Justice Network. We'll be back next month.